Hi folks, okay, so today I want to talk about the social model of disability. So what is the social model of disability? To understand what that is, you kind of need to understand what people think about disability at present. So I'm going to explain to you what the medical model is, and then we'll move on to the social. So the medical model of disability, in simple terms, is the one that's considered normal. It's the way people talk about disability now, and it's the idea that disability comes from within. It comes from you, the individual. So it's about what is your mental health condition, or your impairment, or your deficit, or your deformity or a disease or something. This is disability. Having a condition or a disease or anything like that is a disability. That's it, end of story. And so if we are to look at where is the cause lies with the individual. So for example, if you've got somebody who has spina bifida, for example, the disability comes from this condition. If you've got somebody who, again, my background is autism, so if you've got somebody who's autistic, their difficulty in everyday life comes from being autistic. And so it's about how we put responsibility or cause for disability, and for the medical model we put it onto the medical condition that the individual has, so we put it onto the individual. Now there is something to be said for this that's positive. So the good thing about this is if we say that it's an issue that lies with the individual, then we can try to treat the individual. If it's some sort of disease, like say you've got a bacterial infection because you went swimming somewhere gross and you came out with a bacterial infection, you'd go to your doctor. Your doctor would say, okay, you can't sleep, you can't eat, you can't do whatever, it's because of the bacteria, and we'll give you some antibiotics. You take the antibiotics in accordance with your doctor's instructions, and then you're not sick afterwards. You're fine, you recover, whatever. And so generally speaking, the treatment will go onto the individual because that's where the cause is, right? So that makes a lot of sense when we talk about disease and infection. It makes sense, you know. It was caused by a bacteria, let's get rid of the bacteria, or whatever. Not much of a doctor, but generally that makes sense in the context of disease. In the context of birth defects, you know, conditions that you're born with or something like that, it makes a little bit less sense, because it's not like it's your fault that you were born a certain way. If you went swimming in a pond that was green and the fish in there are dead, then it's kind of your fault for choosing to do that. So if you get sick, we can put the responsibility for the illness on your choice to go into that pond and swim there against your better judgment. And so when we treat the condition, okay, we're not saying you're a bad person for going there, but we are going to say, well, the treatment is on you. We give you the treatment, you must take the pill. We don't like treat the pond or something, we treat the individual. Makes sense. But when it comes to a birth defect, being born differently than other people mentally or physically, we still have this attitude of putting the responsibility onto the individual, and it's up to the individual to seek out and get and maintain treatment, you know. So if you've got some sort of physical impairment, then it's on you to notice it, or your parents if you're a child. It's on you or your family to notice it, to go to the doctor and to arrange to get physiotherapy or an operation, or to learn how to manage it, or to take medication so that you don't experience pain, or whatever it is. It's on you to go and take care of that. You have to actively seek out your treatment, and then once you've successfully sorted it out, you then must attend and keep going. And basically it's all on you, essentially. You have, of course, medical help, but ultimately there's only one person that is sort of on the hook for it. The social model of disability is different in the way that they put causality or put responsibility, and also on the language that they use. So when we talk about somebody who's got a disease, or somebody who was born differently with some sort of congenital effect or whatever, we talk about that as being a disability, and we talk about it as being a disease, a defect, whatever is the medical term. There are specific medical labels for this. When we use the social model, we talk about that label, so spina bifida, autism. That label is not a disability, it's an impairment. And the idea with the social model is impairment plus environment equals whatever the outcome is. Now I'm paraphrasing something that Dr. Luke Bearden said, which he applied to autism specifically. He's really informed by the social model, so if you want a reference for that, I can give you that. But basically what he said applies to the social model. It's the impairment plus the environment that produces the outcome. So if you have an impairment such as autism, falling back on what I know, and you have an unsuitable environment, then your outcome might not be particularly great. If you are autistic and you have a really positive environment, you might not actually experience disability. You know, it's the same as like if you've got a dyslexic person and they are in an environment where reading actually isn't necessary for them to live their life, you know, they don't need it. Like 500 years ago, if you had a dyslexic farmer, they weren't disabled as far as they experienced because they probably didn't have to read, right? You know, so they would never necessarily notice that they were impaired, that they had this label, and they just wouldn't experience it as a disability because there was never the expectation for them to do something beyond what their impairment enabled them to do, you know. Whereas a dyslexic person now in Western culture, in modern society, even if you want to just go shopping or use your phone to text someone, you need to be literate, you need to be able to read, and so that whole environment is disabling. And that's the difference with the social model, is that okay, so you have an impairment that makes you different and makes your needs different, and in the wrong environment, in the right environment, you might not notice a disability. And so there might well be loads of people who go undiagnosed for being neurologically different, but because they have a good environment, they may never notice it. But if you're in the wrong environment, then the environment disables you. So the idea is, with a medical model, the fault lies with you, or maybe not fault, but I'm putting words into people's mouths, I guess, if I say fault. But the responsibility for managing it lies with you. The cause comes from you. Whereas with the social model, it comes from the environment onto you. You know, if you've got a wheelchair user and they need to go to the doctor, for example, and the building does not have a ramp for wheelchairs, then that building is inaccessible. They weren't disabled, and then they went to the building and could not access it, and the building disabled them. Anybody else without a wheelchair need would not be disabled by that, but this person is, because that is not accessible. The social model is the idea that society should be inclusive, and an ideal society would be inclusive, but that's not the society that we live in. There are problems within it that create barriers for disabled people. My mistake, for impaired people, thus producing disabled people. It's a little bit wordy to try to remember to use the correct language if you want to talk about one or the other. You know, if you talk about the medical model, there are certain terms that are completely fine. You would call somebody a disabled person, and in academics, in research, in literature, in writing, in books, all of that, and in the mainstream media, disabled and disability are completely normal words that you use to describe a person. Whereas for the social model, I guess it's more like a state of being rather than a person. Disability is something you experience when the environment doesn't suit your needs and when it's not designed to be accessible. And that's why we've got this shift towards accessible toilets as a name rather than disabled toilets. You know, it's reflection of the social model gaining traction and becoming more popular. Now, what should you use? What should you support? Well, that's up to you. The medical model, like I said before, there are positives to it and there are negatives to it. One of the positives is that if you take on responsibility for your condition, you may find yourself able to try to make your situation better, to obtain treatment yourself. You know, in my master's, one of my participants said that he viewed it as something that he was responsible for or in charge of managing, and so he went out of his way to expose himself to situations that were stressful so that he could build a tolerance for it, so that he could manage his anxiety better. And so for him, taking responsibility and taking charge of his disability did actually lead to him desensitizing himself and helping him with his experience of it. So for him, it was positive to take the medical model view. But then there are other people who might not be as able to do that, people who there are barriers in front of them preventing them from really being able to do that, and those barriers could be financial. You know, if you live in the US, then you might not have the money to pay for a treatment because maybe you don't have insurance, so you just have to be disabled, I guess. I'm not hugely knowledgeable about that situation, but you see what I mean. You know, money can create privilege around disability, and if you have the privilege and you have the money, you have the opportunity, then you can do something about it, and you might be more able to get treatment than somebody without money. And so money becomes a barrier, and so does status, socioeconomic status, and that whole area. There is a third option which I don't really know enough about to really talk about it. If you do, please go ahead in the comments, let me know, and tell me whatever you want to share with me about it. It's the biopsychosocial. So if you've got social model over here, medical model over here, medical model's like, it's on you, the individual, to adapt to your environment and to seek out your own treatment and support. And you've got the social model saying, nah, it's the environment's fault that you're disabled. You shouldn't be disabled just because you've got an impairment, and environment should be suited for everybody. It should be inclusive for everybody. And then somewhere more towards the middle, we've got the biopsychosocial model, which is one that kind of borrows ideas from both. And that's about the full extent of my knowledge on it. If you have any recommendations of stuff I should read about that, that would be great. I'm not quite sure what my perspective is, because the question of what is disability anyway, it's a big one, and I kind of wonder if we decide what disability is on our own terms as disabled people. Able people, it's a bit different. I haven't really gotten to the bottom of my opinion on it yet, so I'm not going to try to waffle through it here. I've already got 13 minutes on this video, but so that's the gist of it. That's the social model, that's the medical model. One great thing about the social model is that it can be quite empowering and quite soothing and reassuring to know that just because you're impaired doesn't mean you're bad or weak, or any of these other things that we connect with stigma around disability and impairment, and that actually there are enough people to justify having a more inclusive society. There are enough people with the same needs as you. I mean, there are enough people to justify putting ramps in, having an autism friendly hour at the supermarket or the cinema or something where the noise is down and the lights are down or whatever, you know. And I think it can be really, really positive when we as a society take on that role of looking after each other and helping each other, and recognizing that just because you're a non-disabled person doesn't mean that you have no responsibility for anybody but yourself, because you don't, because your life will affect other people, your choices will affect other people, and you know, we should be helping each other, we should be being kind to each other. That's just my 2 cents. I hope that you enjoyed this video. I hope you thought it was interesting. If you have any thoughts on anything that I've said, please pop it in the comments below. If you have any recommendations for reading around the biopsychosocial model, I would welcome that. And if you have any suggestions for future videos, please let me know about that. That's it for today. Thank you very much. Bye.